was silence in the room. The quiet he thought was unnatural. It produced a calm that was at odds with these claustrophobic surroundings. All his life he'd been accustomed to noise of some sort, and he found this new silence unsettling. He stood awkwardly, fidgeting with the shutters of the window blinds in an effort to dispel the quiet. From the half-shadow of the bedside lamp he watched her, inscrutably counting the money. He'd begun by telling her about Isabel, how much he loved her and couldn't understand why their marriage was breaking up. With a start, he realized she was watching him, and he lifted his head to meet her gaze. For some minutes he stood thus, no expression save an obvious distaste for the irreversible situation he now found himself caught up in. Silence returned, forming a blanket he was grateful for. And then suddenly she spoke. In the closeness of the room, her voice was remarkably harsh. "You wretched moral profligate, you talk of love. I'll tell you of love. Love is the touch of white patent leather. Love is a struggle in a rented room. Real love exists only for a fleeting moment. It is the difference between grief and passion, the urgent beating of erotic fists. It is the inheritance of the desolate, but no armor against casualties such as you or I." The words struck him like a whip. Incensed and helpless, drowning in the flood of his compulsion, he had opened his mouth to reply when a new sound caught his ear. A dull rhythmic thumping, like the faint strokes of a hidden clock, echoed across the room. His mouth grew dry in horror at this macabre intervention. He glanced quickly at her, but was sure she had not heard it. And then, as the time breathed, and his eyes rose and fell around the room, he found it was the beating of his own heart. He looked up. She was preparing some new apparatus, fastidiously adjusting a set of worn leather thongs and drawing them tight against a long steel rail. He marveled at her efficiency and must have let slip some audible gasp, for she had turned to face him. He quivered, fearing another burst of her lethal rhetoric, but she was smiling. The blonde head moved, and he was reminded of Medusa, noticing the wild hair, a flaxen helmet alive with coiled, misshapen thorns, hovering uneasily atop the imperious mask beneath. Chrome gleamed at her side, and he transferred his gaze to the rail and harness, lingering over cracked leather coverings and intermittent areas of rusted metal. He wondered at this strange accoutrement and tried to imagine the series of collisions that had provided this memento mori with such a fatal acquisition. His watch told him an hour had passed, and he sighed heavily, knowing the time was near. The final adjustments completed, she tossed her hair, and rising abruptly pointed a hand at his mouth, tentatively tracing a figure-8 kiss. "How like talons they are," he mused, and caught his breath in awe of the spectacle. And as the light fell, he watched the moving finger. In those last few moments of his wretchedness, he considered the ruin that was his life. He remembered everything he'd built up or torn down. He remembered the red brick house from where he came. He remembered his father's strong hands that held him, the sweet, sickly smell of his mother's flesh, squeezing tight as she nursed him through thunderstorms. He recalled his wife, prostrate and bellowing on a hospital bed, and the slithering thing that was his son, fighting for the first breath of air. He remembered yesterday's quarrel and the cuts on his hands. And then he remembered he was here in this motel room, interned with a black and white mannequin, poised at the brink of deliverance, 3 feet away from a cold steel rail. He took a step forward, across the wall, parched and waiting like some mad creature of prey. Her eyes, scarred lips gaped, exposing a fence of daggers. Her cat's eyes glittered as she extended a claw, and with a terminal click, switched out the light.